Call this meeting to order. Let us stand for the flag salute, which will be led by Councilmember Mike McCullough. Closed session report, please, by our city attorney.
Yes, the council and agents met in closed session. On the closed session agenda, if I can, Troy took my book. Yeah. On the closed session agenda for real property negotiations, the item involving real property negotiations with VIP was not discussed. The item involving the dump site, Gabay, we gave a status report. Direction was given for further negotiation. The litigation matter, Citizens for Local Government Accountability, we gave a status report. Direction was given for further discussion. With respect to the real property item for the city, the real property negotiations with the other water agency, we gave a status report. Direction was given for further negotiations. With regards to the item involving the Burr Group, that item was not discussed. The item involving real property negotiations concerning Greyhound bus lines, we gave a status report. Direction was given for further negotiations. The item involving real property negotiations for the Catherine Finchley School site, we gave a status report. Direction was given for further negotiations. With respect to the exposure to litigation, we discussed one case. We gave a status report. No action was taken. And the initiation of litigation was not discussed. There was one added item, which was real property negotiations involving the Sunrise Norte development. We gave a status report. No action was taken. That item is on your agenda for public action and our public discussion at the workshop.
Thank you. Council questions or, I'm sorry, our public comments. Tonight, we have a few cards, and the first person is Sheila Talford. If you would please come forward. You will have 3 minutes. And welcome.
Hi. My name is Sheila Talford, and I have pretty much been speaking mostly for the tenants of Sunrise Norte. Oh, thank you. This
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. Thank you. Again, my name is Sheila Tolford, and I have been pretty much speaking for most of the people in Sunrise Norte, doing some of the legwork. And first, I would like to thank Shirley Bush who also enlightened us to some of the things that we needed to know to go forward with this, what we're doing here. I want to also thank Chris Mills and John McCulloch, if I pronounce it right, for coming to all the meetings and being there to just listen and understand our concerns. I also want to thank John Rabin and Al Harsher, if I pronounce it right, Harsher?
It's really close.
Okay. I want to say that they took a lot of time to listen to our needs, and they pretty much went along with what the homeowners wanted. There was only just a couple areas that we feel a little bit concerned about, and one of them is the price of the property. And one of the reasons that we came here tonight, a lot of us, to talk about why we feel we offered $5,000 with a $2,500 transfer fee, making it $7,500. And we just wanted to bring up a few issues that, we felt there was some things that were overlooked in our homes where we live here, like the upkeep of the area, having the land leases not extended as we hoped 6 years ago. We knew nothing about them. We had no understanding, which today some of us who have refinanced our houses, our payments, we can only get 20 and 30-year loans. So our payments are ours is $94 more a month for our refinance than it would be if we could have gotten a 30-year loan. So we were hoping we could have some kind of compensation for some of the things in our area that we feel that should have been done by the city. And we were hoping to get our price of $7,500. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
And thank you. Next is John Gray, followed by Shirley Bush. Good evening and welcome. You'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Oden. Obviously, my name is John Gray. I recently have tried to refinance, and I was told I had an incredible FICO score, very high. It didn't seem to make a hell of a lot of difference because there's something in the lease agreement that they didn't find agreeable, my lender. If I could just quickly read the letter. It says, this letter is written to inform you that H&R Block Mortgage is in the process of trying to refinance a mortgage loan for Mr. John Gray, who resides at 3280 North Sand Spring Road. This process is now running over 45 days at no fault to Mr. Gray or H&R Block Mortgage, but due to the issues related with the lease of the land, we have been unable to provide our underwriters with proper documentation to complete this loan application. We hope for the sake of the individuals affected by this dilemma that the City of Palm Springs does its best to ratify the situation as soon as possible. Thank you, J. Bruno Gonzalez. Quite simply, I went for a 15-year loan, and I still have 28 years of my lease, and I'm having difficulty with a terrific FICO score. I just want you to know that we do have problems with that, and even though they have been addressed, it's just so complicated that we're hoping that you'll simplify everything for all of us. Thank you.
And thank you. Shirley Bush, followed by David Tolford. I'm sorry.
Do I have to push this or anything? No? Okay. Hello, my name's Shirley Bush. I live at Sunrise Palms, which is a neighboring development of Sunrise Norte. We had the same resale restriction. Sunrise Norte has a few more involved. I have to disclose I'm a realtor, and so Sunrise Norte is a little bit more involved. There's one thing, though, that's kind of encouraging in the press and with the new election, whatever. It's like need to interact with the community and neighborhoods working together. And these are refreshing comments from all of you. And believe me, the 51 homeowners of Sunrise Norte, without a doubt, are looking forward to all those things happening. This last year, I have become very, very involved because of the other 3 developments and one that I live in with the resale restriction. Sunrise Norte has a little bit more involved with that because of the land lease not being extended, whatever. So I hope at some point in time, trust me, I've read these things over and over again. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to give me a question. And I would like to make a few brief comments, not now because there's not enough for 3 minutes, but it will be brief. I would like to, and I have, it's broken down as to the city's resale restriction versus the state housing department with their criteria, and they're both going in opposite directions. So that would take very briefly for me to explain, and it just shows how the whole thing was flawed. Then I have a few questions, so I don't know if I can get the questions answered now or after the public comments. But having done this now for a year, I do have some serious questions. Last March, I have a question to Mr. Raymond. When we had, the 4 developments have, 2 of the developments had written request in writing. The other 2 developments, none were required. The city could just waive it. Last March, Mr. Raymond, when we met with Quail Point, he said he'd been working for 5 years to remove these resale restrictions. And now, a year later, I'm wondering what was happening, because 2 of the developments needed written requests, 2 of them did not. So I don't know what he was doing, and I want to know what he was doing for 5 years. I have another question. In the study session of last June, it was brought up that there are 6 properties that were improperly conveyed. I'd like a status on that. I know I have been communicating with one of the owners that I do believe is one of those. They were done with grant deed instead of a lease assignment and consent. And I have spoke with one of the title companies, and it is a serious issue. I would like an update as to currently what is happening with those. At this point in time, I have some other things. The homes in Sunrise Norte, it says that they have to own for 2 years before they can rent. There are currently 19 to 21 homes that are rented, and it has not been monitored.
Thank you, Shirley.
Mr. Mayor, Ms. Bush, if I could ask you, I have, I think, 3 of your questions. If you would want to write down any additional ones you have, give them to Mr. Raymond, and we'll have him address those specifically when he comes to give his report. Thank you.
Thank you. David Tolford. Good evening, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Good evening. Well, thank you for hearing us out. It's been a lot of, quite a ways to get to this point. I believe my wife already spoke, so I don't want to
Would you move a
Repeat
little closer
anything.
to the mic?
repeat anything that she said, but I've been in the neighborhood for about, well, since 1990, and I've seen the neighborhood go down tremendously. I felt that we've been overlooked. Street cleaners, street lights, the outside perimeter with the with the debris and et cetera that's been around. So I think we're right down to the wire on the finances, and I just wanted to say that I felt like we needed to be compensated in some way on a financial level, because I felt like, even though they don't like the word neglect, I've chosen to use the word overlooked. I felt the city has overlooked us, and I don't know how much they have told you about this whole project, but we've had several meetings so far. So that's about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next person is Sue Robertson. If you please come forward, you'll have 3 minutes. Good evening and welcome.
Thank you. I've been asked to read this email on behalf of Mr. Kurt Erickson, who couldn't be present tonight. That's my only function. It's addressed to Shirley Bush. It's from Kurt Erickson, and it's regarding the land lease at 3291 North Sand Spring. I am writing this memo in hopes that it will reach the right hands at City Hall. I say hope because of mounting frustration I have experienced the past year in dealing with the city on this issue and related matters. First, a bit of history. I purchased this home in December of 2002. It was bought with the expectation that it would provide a great second home for myself and my partner. Prior to closing the transaction, I, of course, was made aware of the now infamous CC&Rs. My initial attempt to find out what effect they may have on my proposed purchase was to contact City Hall, of course. At that time, December of 2002, I received an ambiguous response from city personnel about the CC&Rs, the restrictions which may or may not apply, and any kind of definitive response to the city's intentions, which were, save for the fact that the city was interested in selling the land to the homeowners. A week prior to closing, I again went to City Hall and requested to speak with someone in authority regarding this matter, and Marina, who I was told worked in the Office of C&E Development, told me that the whole matter was in the city attorney's office and therefore no one would comment on it. I asked to see Mr. John Raymond and was told he was not available to discuss this matter as well. Out of frustration, after Marina had left the front counter area and told me she could be of no further help to me, a gentleman who was also working the front counter said, "I suggest you call Shirley Bush about this because she really knows more than anyone." He then gave me her phone number. I was a bit confused as to why a city employee would give me a telephone number of someone who works in the private sector to give me answers, but I complied. Unlike anyone at City Hall, Shirley was very informative and gave me all the information and assurance I needed in order to complete the transaction. Over the next year, I have read and heard in city meetings involving other related land issues, and repeated references have been made to, quote, 5 transactions which were incorrectly handled, unquote. Inasmuch as I was one of the 5 most recent purchases, I assume I may be one of them. You can imagine that if the city is implying that my transaction was somehow mishandled, I am very interested in exactly what they're talking about. 5 attempts to contact Mr. Raymond or anyone else at the City Hall to address this issue have gone unanswered completely. To this day, it remains an unsolved mystery. Lastly, because of the former lease times involved in this transaction, we were forced to go to a subprime lender who would risk a 28-year lease and the most we could get for an amortization term was 20 years, and the rate was a higher than market 6.5%.
Ms. Robertson, can you bring that to a close? I'm sorry.
You bet.
Okay. All right. But
I'm
you
not
would like
late.
to leave a copy of that for the record? Thank you. And council will receive a copy of that. And thank you very much. Adam Gray. Good evening, Adam. You'll have 3 minutes.
Good evening, thank you. This is my first meeting of this kind, so I have a lot to learn, and I'm very optimistically looking forward towards it. I've lived in the Sunrise Norte area for approximately 5 years, and seen things on a rise. There is improvements being made, and I'm looking forward to that trend continuing. Just recently purchased my home. I don't know if I added that, but looking forward to the outcome. Thank you very much.
And thank you. If there's anyone else who would like to speak in public comments, I ask that you please come forward this time. Give your name to the clerk. If not, then we will close public comments at this time.
He didn't hear.
Okay.
One of our neighbors.
Hi, my
Anything,
name is
please?
Joe Gillespie, and we purchased our home in June 24th. We closed on it. We had to file for an extension on our escrow right when we were ready to close, and it was all over the CCRs. So we went and we called City Hall, and we talked to Marina, and she said the same thing, that basically she couldn't provide or help our underwriter from the insurance company, well, Wells Fargo. We couldn't get the information we needed. So we ended up, when we were ready to get a 30-year loan at 5%, we had to settle for a 25-year loan at 5.5%, which is costing us about $100 more per month. So, also, only thing we were interested in is we felt consideration should be going in, on the purchase price of our land. Because when we came into the home, we felt like we were kind of dug into a hole. And then when you guys came up with the current appraisal rate, we just didn't think it was right. We think it should actually be a little bit lower, mainly because we couldn't get that 30-year mortgage. So, that's all.
Okay.
But otherwise, I love it out there. It's a nice neighborhood. Thank you.
And thank you. If there's no one else who would like to speak in public comments, then we will close public comments at this time. Council, comments, questions, or reports?
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Mills?
it's more of a request than any of the three, and I wonder if what I'd like to have the city manager do, and it's something I've been brought up the last 2 meetings, and it has to do with special events. I would like to see a report from the Bureau of Tourism as to what their vision of special events, managing special events is, what it has been in the past and what it is to be in the future, and how they think this should be handled, as I think it's part of what their responsibilities are under their contract. And I also like for them to give us a report. I'm talking about them, meaning the Bureau of Tourism, report on their success or failure, as it may be, of the Rocktoberfest event and the Elvis weekend event, to try and evaluate things I'm hearing from one source and another, to try and to understand where we are on those 2 events and what we can look forward to in the future. So if you could pursue that for me with Ms. Ford, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Anything else, council? Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I would like
Yes,
to
John.
see the city manager possibly bring for our consideration as a council a resolution supporting state propositions 57 and 58. If we look at our, you referred to the chart today in your State of the City address where when we look at the red numbers on the far right of $8 million possible budget deficit, I believe that's predicated on the failure of that financing mechanism. So I think it's something that I'd like to see brought to council as soon as possible for our consideration.
Let's vote.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I was planning on bringing that to our city council meeting next week, along with a resolution asking for our support of the California Cities initiative also. And so I'll work with David on that.
That sounds good. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, just briefly.
Yes.
I'd like to thank you for your time and your effort for your State of the City speech today. It was informative, and I hope all the citizens of the city that were attended and will watch it on Channel 17 will enjoy it and understand it as well as I think I did.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. City manager comments and follow-up to requests?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Just one thing I would like to know. We've had several complaints lately and requests for information with regard to the security line at the airport, particularly at the morning rush hour. The line to go through security has been backed up clear to baggage. And as you know, the TSA handles security. That was pretty much out of our hands. However, Barry Griffith, our acting aviation director, has been looking at some ways to help alleviate that. And I would just like council to know that what we're doing is he's done some emergency purchase orders to do the extra security line, if you will, in a separate location, which means the long and short of it is we will have 3 lanes instead of 2 lanes for the normal traffic going through security. So that will be implemented as soon as possible, and that should help alleviate the line. And I would just note that there's a longer-term solution that is being worked out with the TSA, but we do have an immediate solution that should help that problem. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move to item F, our city council study session topics, and the first one is Sunrise Norte lease. Staff report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I would ask Mr. Raymond to come to the table. He's going to give the staff report. We've dealt with this issue for several months. We would like some final direction on the solution that we will ultimately bring to the legislative calendar as soon as possible. Also, City Attorney Mr. Alshire will have some comments as well. With that, we'll start with you, JR. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Sunrise Norte issue is, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes of background on it. It's a tract that the city actually owns the land and is the landowner for the homeowners up there. There's 51 homes, and it's an area just north of San Rafael near Sunrise. Back in 1982, the city entered into an agreement with the developer to develop 60 acres of that tract in what became the Sunrise Village Mobile Home Park, Sunrise Norte, ultimately Coyote Run, and actually a portion of what's now going to be the Cay Hovnanian Four Seasons project. The developer built Sunrise Norte in 1983 and 84. He was on originally a 50-year lease with the city, and his instrument was he conveyed his leasehold interest to the homeowners as they bought the parcels. When we did the lease originally, there were CC&Rs, or covenants, conditions, and restrictions that were recorded against the property. One of the CC&Rs was included, and several of the speakers referred to it, was a resale restriction that capped the resale price of the homes at the original sales price plus the run-up in CPI, plus capital improvements, if they put a pool in or a new block wall or a new roof on or something like that. For most of the history of Sunrise Norte, the resale restrictions were not really did not really create a hardship because the increase in prices did not, the prices didn't increase faster than CPI. So people would come in and get the resale calculation, and the maximum price they could sell for was higher than what they were actually selling it for. In the last couple of years, of course, with the overall increase in real estate values, that's become quite a bit of an issue. And it was an issue in the other tracks, Sunrise Palms and Desert Dorado and Quail Point, and there was kind of a movement over the last couple of years to get those lifted. In the other 3 tracks, the council lifted those restrictions back in July, but the city didn't have an ownership role. There was no other role in those projects except for the restriction, and those were due to a density bonus and not through a lease or through any real estate arrangement. But in 1991, the developer who built Sunrise Norte and who then was the master leaseholder actually quit claimed his lease. He got out of the project. He'd sold off the mobile home park. Coachella Valley Housing Coalition was coming in to build Coyote Run, and he was unable to kind of develop more real estate there. And he basically gave the lease back to the city and his leasehold interest, and that's when the city became the sort of direct leaseholder to the individual homeowners. Prior to 1991, they were making their lease payments to Frederick's Development, not to the city, and so it took a year or so, I think, I wasn't here then, but to sort of clear that up. But the city's been the leaseholder ever since at a rate of $12.49 a month. And now the problem, there's 2 problems. One is that the speakers talked to you about the CC&Rs, and the other is that the lease was originally a 50-year lease, and now it's 22 years later. They're down to 28 years on the lease, and they are unable to obtain conventional 30-year financing, and they have to go to other forms of financing, whether it's a 25-year loan or 20-year loan. And so combined with the CC&Rs, it has created a situation out there where people are very unhappy about the lease situation. Back during the process of looking at the resale restrictions in all 4 of the tracks, the city did go and appraise the value of the lots out in Sunrise Norte. And we commissioned that appraisal in June. I think we got it in July, and the value came back at $11,350. Starting in October, we began a series of meetings with the homeowners there to talk about what we were looking at was a lease extension, going and just extending the lease. If they wanted to lift the resale restrictions, we would have to do a fair market lease, which would have to be done at appraised value. So no longer could we do the $12.49 lease. The lease it went to $63 under one scenario, or up to $94 a month under another scenario. Obviously, that's a big jump. And what Dave Alshire and Mr. Mills was in the first couple of meetings, and I really heard in the first meeting or 2, was that people really wanted to buy the lots. And so we said, well, if you want to buy the lots, and you want to buy the lots without any additional restriction, you have to buy it at, we'd have to sell it to you at the fair market value, the $11,350. Obviously, you've heard this, the $5,000 price. That's sort of been the fairly constant counter proposal, $5,000 with the $2,500 transfer fee, or for a total of $7,500 from the homeowners. Our appraisal says $11,350. So over a series of meetings, we came up with, well, as it turns out, not everybody wanted to buy. Some people wanted to continue to lease, but they wanted a lease without restrictions. So we ended up by December, starting in October, by December, with a relatively complex proposal that allowed for people to buy the lots at fair market value at $11,350 with 3 different ways that they could finance it. This assumed that the city would be the financing vehicle, that they wouldn't have to come up with the money out of pocket or go to a lender to buy it, but that just like we're collecting rent, we would collect the mortgage payments. One was 100% due upon sale. So we're conveying it to you, we have a lien, and you're not making any payments on it, but when you sell the property, it's accruing interest at a rate of 5%, but the entire amount would be due upon sale. Another was, I believe, a 50-50 proposal. Half of it would be amortized. You'd be making payments on half of it. The other would be a silent loan due upon sale. And in the end, if you sold like in 10 years, you'd have to pay the unamortized portion plus the silent loan. And the third was a 75% silent, 25% amortized. In addition to that, we had the residents said, well, not everyone wants to buy. Some people want a lease. So we had a lease proposal. We had a market rate lease that was based on a 7% capitalization rate, and it was $60-something, $66, I believe, a month. And that was no resale restriction on the home, but a $66 a month lease. Then it was, some people would like to continue in the old lease. They'd like the $12.49. So could you keep the old lease? Well, that also remained an option. So we had a whole series of options there. And at our meeting in December, and again, some of the speakers alluded to that we were pretty close on most of the sort of ancillary deal points, except for the price. And it's the staff's opinion that the price, because it's based on appraisal, if people want to get out of it under the umbrella of it being a market rate deal, it's got to be a market rate price. If somebody wanted to buy a lot for $5,000 and was willing to live with an ongoing resale restriction, then that would be appropriate, because the city would be providing a subsidy, and the city then would be getting something in return, which is kind of a covenant that helps ensure the continued supply of affordable housing in the community. So in January, we sent a rather lengthy letter to all the owners there, and talking about the kind of walking them through the history of the tract, what the various options were, and sort of laying out a proposal. I believe you all got copies of that a couple of weeks ago, and then again in your packet on Friday. So that basically summarizes the back and forth and the proposal that that we put together based on a series of meetings with the owners. Again, to recap the owners' proposal, they wanted a sales price of $5,000 with a transfer fee, and a transfer fee is not uncommon in certain types, especially like condo projects and things like that, where every time it sells, actually, a transfer fee is paid. In their case, it's $2,500. And then they had a lower interest rate, a 3% interest rate for 30 years, and with like a $21 a monthly payment. And then also with the option of staying in the existing lease at $12.49 a month, but then going with a 25% every 5-year escalator. So there's kind of two different proposals. We had started drafting a lease document, but we felt that it was important to get it in front of the council and get a little direction on which way the council would like us to go in trying to prepare a document. What our goal is to try to do a kind of an overall document that contained all of the different provisions. You could buy, you could lease at market rate, you could have the subsidized lease, or you could forego entering that deal altogether and stay in the existing lease. And just the last thing, the council did approve in November a lease extension granting an additional lease all the way out to, I believe, 2064. So people have a new 60-year term, and we have been recording those as escrows have come in, and but that also remains an option, that we could just stay in that existing lease at the existing $12.49 a month, but people have, and it's been approved by council, 60 years that they could stay in. So that's an additional option. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Council, are there any questions? I know some of you have been involved in these meetings. If you have questions or observations that you'd like to share. Mr. Ponier.
I was just going to say that Mr. Reddy had mentioned that Mr. Alshire was going to make some comments as well. Could that be beneficial to do that now?
I think JR covered the subject very well. The most important thing to me is that I understand the residents' concern from the initial process and the confusion over the sales program. We have tried to deal with those concerns by developing first one proposal, but because it was a group and they had somewhat different interest, we started layering different things onto the proposal to try and deal with all these problems. The proposal the city is making now may sound a little complicated, and well, indeed, it probably is complicated from the standpoint that there's not just one option now. There are a whole series of options, and that can create some complexity. We haven't gone forward with drafting the documents because of the complexity of putting that together. However, it's been an effort. We've gone through that process in an effort to try and have a big tent that we could get everybody in. So I'm happy to answer questions. I might also just comment on the fact that I think the first speaker, Mr. Gray, was talking about trying to deal with a specific transaction, and he read a letter and was sort of suggesting, and he wasn't quite sure where it was at. Just to let him know, the paperwork on his transaction came to my office yesterday. I was only in the office today and signed off on it, and so that's moving forward, if that's any relief to him.
Thank you, Mr. Alshire. Ms. Foat.
Mr. Mayor, I was not a member of the subcommittee, so I was not at all
Well,
of
there
the
was no official subcommittee. They just met with different people.
Well, Mr. McCulloch thought he was on a subcommittee. So. But anyway, I just had a couple of questions. If we have that the payment for the land is due upon sale, then what happens in between with the lease payments? Did they cease?
Well, presumably the way that would work is that when they enter into the transaction to buy it, yes, the lease payments would cease. They're now the owner, but we had several ways that we had worked out the financing of that. They're the owner. They're not making lease payments, but we tried to come up with a couple options. One where basically half of the loan amount would be amortized, and the other half would be due on sale. But we also had an option where none of it would be amortized and it would all be due on sale. So that's like whatever time period it goes until they actually have a sale. So there's the possibility that they're making no payments on our portion of the financing, and we get our money out of the transaction where the sale occurs.
But so for the entire extent of that time, say 20 years even, there would be no lease payment, and then it would just be the sale of the land at that time, at that current market value or at the $11,000?
Well, we basically are financing what our loan was. So we're not getting the appreciation, the value of land if it sells way off in the future.
It accrues interest, though.
Yeah, it does accrue interest.
In the handout we had that was from the homeowners meeting on the last page, it gives an example. If somebody had a $11,350 silent second, they chose not to make payments and finance the whole 100% as a silent. And we just use an example of 10 years. Obviously, it would be 30 years. But say somebody in 10 years sold, the city would be due $18,693. That's at a 5% rate, and that's compounded. And so, yes, we would not have received the any payments in the intervening time, but that's what would be due in 10 years. And we have a couple of other examples. If the one David was talking about, where it's 50-50, what would be due in 10 years? They'd owe $4,600 on the 50% that they've been paying on, $9,300 on the 50% that they haven't made payments on, and for a total of $13,962. So, they'd owe like $5,000 less at the sale in 10 years, but would have been making payments at $30.76 a month for the 5 years in between.
Okay. And then the other question I had was about the transfer fee. Did I misunderstand when you said that this transfer fee would be applicable for the first sale, but then would that attach to the property? Like, many cities have a transfer fee. Were we thinking of putting a transfer fee on the continual sales of these properties?
Well, the transfer fee was not staff's proposal. It came from the residents, and the residents have only talked about the transfer fee, really applying, I believe, to the first sale. But typically, other cities that have transfer fees, it does attach to the property, and every time it's sold, you receive the same transfer fee, whether it's $1,000 or $500, or in this case, $2,500. So,
and if I could just point out that the transfer fee proposal being made by the residents is coupled with that $5,000 sales price, which is why when the earlier speaker left, she said that the price they were looking for was $7,500. She was really lumping those two things together.
Okay. And then I guess my last question is in reading through this, I mean, it took me about 3 reads to really understand, and I don't even know if I understand it now, but it was quite complicated. And so at the other end of that, I believe, would be Mr. Kennard's department, who would be administering
Yes.
this. And this seems to me to be a full-time person to have to administer this. Am I just getting overwhelmed by the complications, or who is going to administer this?
Well, right now they administer the lease payments, and there's the city has an accounts receivable person, and she's got a file. You pull the file out, and so pays her, and that's actually billed quarterly, because it's $37 and something a quarter, and so I mean it's not a monthly in that case. It's a quarterly, so it cuts the workload down. In the case of the something that would be a silent loan, I mean it's a lien, and the liens actually do come through our office, and we make the demand, and if somebody had a silent loan, it was 100% silent. When they went to sell, the escrow would send that through our office, and then we would do the calculation and make the demand notice to the escrow, and then be paid. Obviously, the money would go to Tom, but the paperwork is processed by us. We do the consents now. We do the calculations on the resale. So it's over time, as under a sale proposal, over time you would have fewer and fewer to do. Because if people were buying at market rate, and the city were selling them at market rate, and the restrictions were lifted, basically at that point you don't have and once you've been paid, either you don't have a lien, you don't have a restriction, you're not tracking it anymore. Under an ongoing lease, it's not probably not any more onerous to collect the lease payment at a $63 lease than it is at a $12 lease. Although perhaps it would have to be monthly rather than quarterly, because it would be more money.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Mills.
JR, just in a nutshell, essentially, this project is separate from the other 3 we dealt with before, in that the city actually is the landowner in this case. In the other three cases, we were not a landowner. We just had restrictions, resale restrictions.
Yeah, and that's a really important distinction, because the legal basis for putting the restrictions on the others was a land use decision, and it was a program that the city developed as a way of allowing density bonuses and a way of sort of figuring out how to do affordable housing under the state law. This is an actual lease. I mean, it's we're the owner, and we're providing, based on today value, a significantly below market lease.
We were in the other three cases, we simply lifted restrictions, no dollars, no anything like that. It was a very simple transaction.
That's correct.
From that standpoint. And let me go a little further. And that the reason the project Sunrise Norte existed originally was to provide low, moderate cost housing for citizens. And that was what that's what the intent of it is currently. Is that correct?
Yes. When under the original agreement with Fredericks right. was to develop, up to 60 acres of affordable housing.
And what we're finding out now is that we have buyers that are renting, people have bought it and now they're renting it. We found out from the letter that was read earlier that a gentleman purchased it as a second home. I mean, neither of those are supposed to happen in this project. Is that correct?
That's correct. The flaw in the resale restrictions as they exist is it doesn't. It only caps the price, with the theory being that if the price is low enough, it would be affordable to low-income people. But it doesn't prevent somebody that's an investor or speculator or second homeowner that's above moderate income, from buying and owning the house. And so I think, we've seen a fair amount of that out there.
And we also have a problem with 5 or 6 homes that evidently have been purchased in fee when there really was no fee ownership.
That's right.
Which we will be dealing with. My concern is, and I know the homeowners feel the same way, is that, the simplest transaction that we can create here will be better for everyone, not only just understanding, just operationally. The city has not had a real good history of managing this property, nor the and when I say manage, I mean managing the lease payments and everything else, and the paperwork transactions from sales, and that carried through to the other projects. We saw it was just, the city's not really set up to do that. And in reality, I don't think the city should be set up to do that. So as we started out in the meetings with the group, as you mentioned, as David mentioned, there was people wanted different things. People were looking towards different things, and to try and resolve all those different things, you end up with, as Ginny mentioned, a document and a process that is getting us right back to where we were trying to get away from, in my view. And although it's a good process, and it's a good way to get people what they want. And I agree with that. I like the terms, but I feel like we're creating a monster here. It's just only going to require more staff time, and people having to try to understand something that is going to be difficult to understand, especially now you're dealing with lending institutions, you deal with second buyers, and it's just, I'm all for simplification. But if you're going to simplify it, and if the city determines, if the council determines that they ultimately are willing to lose, I guess, for lack of a better word, this housing stock in our overall goal, which is to maintain a certain number, which are not only a goal, it's a requirement by the state, to maintain our housing stock of low and moderate, we could ultimately, with what we're talking about here, lose all 51 of those units, and over a period of time. I mean, we could, not necessarily saying that we will. So, my concern is torn between keeping that housing stock and breaking away clean from these lots and making your life easier, making those people's life easier, and consequently my life easier. So, and I know Mr. Alshire's life easier, but and it's not about making it easy. It's about making things just understandable, and people feel like they're part of something, part of a neighborhood, and I know ultimate ownership brings pride, and I think it's been proven, and I think probably one of the reasons the discussions we had when it was the old council was, we wanted to do that. We wanted to encourage people to invest in their properties and that type of thing. But there are people that will need to continue and want to continue on the lease process and aren't interested in the sale. It's a bit of a quandary from my standpoint. If you really wanted to make this simple, you would go back and you look at the residents' proposal, and I don't want to talk about numbers, but just the system. Whatever the sales price is, you're asking for financing terms for the city to buy out the land, buy out the land lease, and special terms for fixed and low incomes. If we were truly trying to make this simple, we would take the city out of this completely and say, okay, if you're interested in buying your specific lot, we've extended the lease so anybody that wants to keep leasing is fine, or refi based on not owning. But if you want to own it, then you can simply do that. You could simply come in with your own financing, leave the city out of it, buy it for whatever that number is, and handle it any way you want to do it. And then out of that loan, the city would get paid off for whatever that fee is, just like a normal type of a transaction. Then people wanted to lease could stay on with the lease as it is now. No 50/50s, no anything like that. But that's not going to make everybody happy. I mean, because there's some people that really benefit from the 50/50 program, and that would benefit from ultimately owning their property, which is what staff has really worked at doing, and I think they've got a good way of handling it. But I don't know how the rest of the council looks at it, but I mean, it's a tough decision to see which way to go, because we will be ultimately losing 51 units of housing stock. So we need to think about it and ponder it and ask questions now. And I know this is scheduled to come up next month, David. And I'm still not quite sure where we need to go here, or where I need to go. But I would like to ask one question, because it's come up before. There is not a homeowners association for this. Is that correct?
There was one created originally, and it was disbanded in '91 around the time of the quitclaim, and then there was an assessment district created that was a maintenance assessment district.
And that essentially took over what was homeowner association
HOA,
property.
Yeah.
And who monitors that assessment district?
It's a city assessment district. So
the city the city should be responsible for monitoring, upkeep, all that type of thing. Okay. What would happen with what happens with that assessment district? Would it strictly remain an assessment district then, and each property would be assessed?
Yeah, I believe so.
Because
This
there's
wouldn't-
like a common
yeah.
area, right?
Yeah, there wouldn't be.
But the common area
Just-
only works if you have 51 people own it. I mean, it doesn't work if only half of the units are sold and half of them are leased.
Well, all of the properties are assessed. I mean, they're
Correct.
currently assessed now where
So
presumably nobody.
So that would stay as
yeah,
it is.
Yeah.
Okay. And any improvements to any improvements to that common property is to be paid through the assessment district. Is that right?
Yeah, you're getting in the assessment district stuff, and but yeah, I
don't wanna do
believe
that.
so.
Okay. Okay.
You can ask Dave when he comes up.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr.
I would
McCall.
like a report from staff, please, on the stock of our low and moderate income housing and where it stands, what our obligations are. You said the state has requirements that we maintain a certain level, and what the city council's obligations are, and what maybe the penalties would be if we lose even more of the stock or we haven't replaced that stock.
Do you want just a response to that now, or?
Well, if they're not ready for it now, obviously I can't get a response now, but I think that's part of the puzzle here that we as a council need to consider. I am not up to speed on this issue.
Okay, we will get a written report, but I think Mr. Alshire does have a comment.
Well, I don't know whether JR can tell you the specific numbers, but basically we have a couple sets of requirements. One set of, and we can put something in writing if you'd want a brief.
Yes.
We're members of the Southern California Association of Government Planning Region, and basically it's mandated by state law that within these regional planning areas there is a computer modeling process that tries to look at the different land uses and establish for each city what the housing goals are for different economic segments, different housing types. And these goals are expressed in terms of 5-year goals that you are supposed to meet. These goals have to be incorporated in your housing element, and you're required by law to have a housing element. So there is a legal process that requires us to have a housing element and have goals, and through this process that they have, they try and determine what the need is for low and moderate income housing, and then they allocate those housing units to each community based upon criteria in their computer modeling process. And then each community has an ability to protest the numbers that they are assigned. And actually, sometimes there gets to be litigation over that. What the consequences are of for example, not having a housing element or not including the requirements in your housing element that you're required by state law to have, the consequences include such things as, and this happened in Indian Wells a few years back, where their housing element was found to be inadequate. And based upon the inadequacy, a citizens group was able to sue and prevent the city from issuing any building permits for residential development until their housing element came into compliance. Now, that isn't real common, and you tend not to get into that problem unless there's quite a bit of resistance to trying to meet the state requirements. But it is a possibility that can happen. Notwithstanding that, it's fairly common that communities do not meet their goals. You have to not only not have a housing element, not meet your goals, you've got to have a group out there that wants to make an issue out of it. So there can be serious consequences. Another issue is in terms of having restricted housing, to count housing towards the redevelopment agency has obligations in terms of providing low and moderate income housing as well. And housing only counts if it is restricted by covenant or other agreement in terms of the things such as by the price or by qualified persons occupying the unit. So there are quite a few requirements. I am not the right person to comment upon where we are in terms of our housing element. I don't know whether JR wants to make a comment on that, or that would be part of the report back.
I think thanks for that report. That was very educational. I think I would like to see from our report, I would like to see some hard numbers as to where we are, where we're supposed to be, according to state rules and regulations, what our plans are, what's on the table now to replenish or to meet those requirements. And because I just got shivers from what you just told me, because I think there is an element of the community that would like to see no additional residential housing developed in Palm Springs, and would be happy to initiate a lawsuit to encourage that. So I'm very, very, at this point, cautious about, we need to pay attention to this and make sure that we are in whatever levels of compliance that we can at least try to maintain. I look forward to seeing that report.
Mr. Mills. JR, based on, or David, either one of you, whichever, based on the description you just gave for what classifies as low or mod housing as far as the state goes, if we looked at the city proposal, really none of those really are going to keep those in that classification. Well, other than the third one, which is the, well, no, I mean, it becomes a sale. So with the sale, the restrictions are removed. So even in the city proposal, we're going to lose it for housing stock. Is that correct?
The fair market sale loses it out of the housing stock. The fair market lease would lose it out of the housing stock. In both cases, you'd end up eliminating the resale restriction on it. Somebody staying in the existing lease, or somebody choosing to opt for a below market lease, where the resale restriction remained, would stay in the inventory.
So really, that the answer to that is going to go towards basically what market conditions dictate. As the real estate values go up, it basically will be in people's economic interest to go ahead and take advantage of the sale option. I think there are probably some persons in the group that, just given the lease situation and what their economic circumstances are, would end up staying in the lease. But I think you're correct in I think where that question is going, that even under the city proposal, we would envision over a long enough time scale that probably you'd lose all the units, because there'd be a significant economic advantage to going that route.
Mr. Mayor, I misspoke. The below market lease is the current lease. So there wasn't a below market subsidized lease as part of the new proposal. It was only the option of staying in the current lease.
Mr. Prunier.
One of the items that I would like to see, because it seems to be a bone of contention, certainly, is the appraised value. And I'd like to see a copy of the appraisal report and see exactly what that appraisal says from last June.
Are there any other requests, observations?
Could I make one
Yes.
comment on what Councilmember Mills was talking about in terms of the residents' proposal, and in terms of working on that potentially being simpler than what the city has proposed? And undoubtedly you're correct about that. I would ask, because we had this issue when we were trying to think our proposals through, if you do think about something along those lines, you also need to think about the issue as to whether you're going to give people sort of a one-time chance to make the selection, or whether they're going to have an ongoing ability of making that selection. If you're going to give them the ongoing ability, then we actually will have to amend all the existing leases in order to create that option. If it's a one-time selection, then we could prepare documents that allow people to go make that sale choice. If the intent is to, on an ongoing basis, allow them to lease, but then in the future select that option, then you'd probably want to put that provision into the current lease, which would involve a lease amendment to do that. So I'm just, even that simple idea, there are a couple choices there in terms of how we'd have to go down that road, just for you to factor into your thinking.
Ms. Folt.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I'm going to go back to my question because this, Mr. Raymond, I don't believe that this is just going to be a simple thing that your department is going to be able to handle as it is proposed by the city. So I think I would like to actually see a report on how it is going to be handled, because as we talked about, we have lost 6 pieces of property in this land already that were just sold out from underneath the city. So I think it's important that if we do go with this, what kind of a monitoring system, or what kind of an accounting system will we have in place to make sure that this is all done properly, so for the benefit of the city, but also for the benefit of the homeowner, when it's time to sell, that all of those records are clear and well kept, and there's not a problem on sale. So I'd like to see some sort of an outline of how we're going to do this if we went with this more complicated proposal.
Mr. Fournier?
One more question, and maybe this is for Ms. Bush. During our comments, you mentioned that 19 or 21 owners are renting out their units. Have they been completely involved in the negotiations and the process? Yeah.
Through Sheila Tolford, who's been knocking on the doors for this for the last several months, and also through the tax rolls, it's quite obvious there's between 19 and 21 homeowners, homes that are not owner-occupied. And on the original criteria, they had to be owner-occupied for at least 2 years, which has not been monitored. So am I answering your question?
So they've been actively involved with
the actual
these
homeowners
discussions.
with this whole thing? Yes.
Okay.
Yes, but as far as the homes being owner-occupied,
Right.
19 or 21 out of 51, so 40-some% are not owner-occupied.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Before Mr. Reddy summarizes what he believes he's heard from us in terms of our request, I think that it's important for us in whatever we do to make sure that we clean this process up and not to get into another process, which you're recommending, Ms. Folt, that perpetuates what we already have. I think that's going to be very important. And ultimately, I guess the main thing that we have to decide is whether or not we want to retain the housing stock as we clean this up in the affordable area, or do we just want to clean it up by the process of allowing the sales? So, Mr. Reddy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In summary, I just want to make sure I have clear direction on the reports. We have Mr. McCullough report on the Lomont housing, what the requirements are and our current status of where we are meeting that housing element. Also, the Sunrise Norte appraisal report for Mr. Punier, and Ms. Fote had indicated she was interested in an implementation execution schedule, how this actually will manifest in terms of the process, monitoring, accounting. I think that summarizes it, Mayor.
Okay.
Also, the consequences of what's happened to cities who have not met the stock
Our housing
requirements.
obligation.
Yes.
Penalties.
Yes, Mr. Mills.
And I think maybe one thing too might look at. If these properties sold and the city got whatever number the city gets, that's going to generate a certain amount of money that goes back into the housing fund, to which could participate in creating housing in some other form than what this is. Is that correct?
Well, it actually it was, the land was originally purchased with CDBG, so it would go back in CDBG.
Okay.
Which you could use for housing. or you could use for other community or infrastructure or capital projects.
So it's not like it's a complete loss here. I mean,
Oh, no.
I mean the sales money, the sales would go back into CBG, as you say.
Yeah.
So whether or not that 510 is going to generate 51 units or not might be another story, but it could help generate something. So if there's any way, JR, to think about what might happen with that, how that could be used, and how many units could we maybe get involved in subsidized wise to offset, so we're not looking at maybe 51 as a total loss. If that's where it goes, maybe it's half of that or whatever. So thank you.
That's good. I'd just like to say, express our appreciation to Ms. Tolford for the work that you've done, bringing this information to us, and Shirley for your continued effort, and all of the residents who have come to voice their concerns. Thank you.
Ready?
Mr. Reddy will move. Mr. Reddy will move to item number 2.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Item number 2 has to do with bond refinancing. The issue before us is going to be refinancing of the bonds for the redevelopment agency, the convention center, and the airport. There are obviously some advantages to doing that. This is a issue for the legislative calendar, but as you can appreciate, there's a tremendous amount of work from our advisor, bond counsel, and staff to prepare for these, and want to make sure that this is a direction you wanted us to go into before we actually brought them to the City Council. With us this evening is Mr. Kanar, our Finance Director, and also Suzanne Harrell from Harrell & Company, who is our bond advisor. And with that, I would ask Mr. Kanar to frame the issues, and we would go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reddy. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, what we're passing out here, the first one, is just a listing of all of the debt obligations of the city, and it's broken down by the general fund obligations, airport redevelopment, conduit financing, and assessment districts. This is all of the things that we have, and we thought it would be useful maybe just as a background to see all the different bond issues that we have. We put on there items number 1 and 3. Those have been paid off this year, and obviously are not going to be part of this discussion because they've been paid off. It was the capital lease for the computers, the master lease 2, and the 1989 refunding certificates of participation. And if I use any abbreviations like COPs, please stop me and I'll try to fill in what the words mean. And that was for the wastewater treatment plant. As I said, those 2 have been paid off. We're going to be talking about 3 bond issues for refinancing, and I'll try to be very brief and just frame the issues and when these will be coming back to the City Council. And if you have specific information or specific questions about the structure of the financing, I certainly encourage you to ask Ms. Harrell those questions and not me. Thank you. But I will try to answer whatever questions you do have. The first one I'd like to talk about is the refinancing of the 1992 airport bonds. And if we could pass those out. Yeah, that was previously sent to you, but I brought a copy if you happen to need it. Okay. Again, what we're recommending that we're going to be doing on this one is to refinance the 1992 Series A and B airport revenue bonds, sometimes referred to as GARBs. What the new bond issue would accomplish, it would extend the maturity of the existing bond issue from July 1st, 2022 to July 1st, 2034. This would reduce the airport's annual debt service payment by about $300,000 per year through 2022. And then, of course, since those old bonds would have been paid off and this one is extended, we'd have higher debt service payments in the latter years. It would reduce the net interest costs from the existing bond issues from about 6% to approximately 5.03% on the new bonds. And so we have an interest rate savings. And all of that combined would produce a net present value savings of about $284,000. The primary reason we're doing this refinancing, because that's a relatively small savings for a bond issue of this size, is because there's a very restrictive rate covenant in the 1992 bond issues. It requires us to set aside if the income is 1.25%, 125% ratio of coverage for expenses. And the problem we have is that to try to make that rate covenant every year would require us to go back to the airlines and ask them for rate increases if in fact revenue's fallen, like happened after September 11th. And only recently now are we getting back up to the levels of revenue that we were enjoying prior to that. Well, the problem is if you can't go into the airlines and just simply say, pay us more money, because they'll say, fine, we'll put more flights in here. So it would become a degrading cycle where we would get less and less money, and we'd have fewer and fewer flights, and it would not be in the interest of the city, of the airport, of the airlines, or of the traveling public for any of that to happen. But unfortunately, this requirement is in that bond issue. This would take care of that. And Suzanne, I don't know if you want to add anything on details on that one?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council.
Good evening.
One of the primary structural problems with the 1992 bonds is that the airport receives passenger facility charges on each airline ticket that are available to pay the debt service for the airport expansion, that was completed in 2000. Unfortunately, this rate covenant we talked about generating the 125% of debt service does not allow PFC revenues to be included in the calculation. And in 1998, we did our best to try to work around that covenant in structuring the debt for the expansion of the airport, but unfortunately there was not a whole lot we could do because the 1992 bonds were already outstanding. So this will really help in lowering the debt service and maintaining some predictability in what you can charge your airlines.
Let's see, I think there's a schedule on the last page of what I did pass out. We would be bringing this back to council. The first council action would be on April 21st. If there's information that we've provided in the packet as far as how the financing would work, we would encourage you to ask us for that information ahead of time, and we'd try to get that. And you can see the entire schedule there, a whole variety of actions that we would have to take, but the bonds would close on May 25th under this current schedule. That's when we would actually sell the bonds.
Mr. Mills.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Tom and Suzanne, just a quick question on the cover sheet when you're talking about what we're looking at doing. Number 4, the produce a net present value savings over the term of the bonds about $248,000. Now, the cost of the bonds are all included in that number. So that's the bottom line. Everything.
Yes, that's after all costs.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. McCullough.
What's the rationale for extending the maturity date past the current maturities?
Again, it was basically to lower debt service in the earlier years in order to, so that we didn't have to go back to the airlines and raise their rates in order to meet our bond covenants.
Is it possible, could we have someone perhaps from the airport to address that issue for us?
Actually, we have Barry Griffith here, our Acting Director of Aviation. Barry, could you come forward, please?
I guess one of the questions that I have on this is that a lot of times, at least in private financing, we try to match the term of the loan to the life expectancy of whatever asset we have, or until we need to maybe, for instance, a car loan is not going to be a 20-year loan. Also, if we have something that's going to need significant improvement later, we would want to maybe have to reissue bonds at that point in time to cover that. So that's kind of the idea that that's where my question came from, was that logic.
Well, I think Suzanne said it best in terms of the predictability that we're trying to give our airlines so that they can accurately budget what their rates and charges will be each year, as well as we're doing our best not to raise those charges so they'll continue to bring service in, which brings in more tourism dollars, which benefits us all. So that's really the rationale for the extension.
If I could respond also, the 1992 bonds financed an expansion of the airport, and the original bond had a 30-year maturity. This would extend that original bond to a 40-year maturity, and I think the useful life, probably the useful life of the assets that were constructed in 1992 would be at least 40 years. So if that's a concern.
Ms. Foat.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, I think I'm a little bit confused about, are we going then with the same amounts of the bonds as what is left on the outstanding balance? Or is there additional monies that we're including into this bond issue?
The bonds will be issued strictly to refinance and restructure your existing debt. Of course, the principal amount will be a little bit higher to pay for any additional costs of issuing the bonds.
And how much higher is a little bit higher? I've been very concerned about our debt ratio, and with the bonds, and so if it's not going to be as we see the outstanding balance, then how much is a little bit additional?
Well, the costs of issuance are typically would raise the issuance from the outstanding amount by about 5%. But the lower interest rate is intended to make up for that, so that the overall payments should be lower.
So it would be 5% of 13 million. Then where does the 284,000 in savings come in? Because that doesn't seem like a savings to me.
It's present value savings. $1 today is worth more than $1 32 years from now or 30 years from now. And so what we're doing is pushing off some of those payments out to later years. And what we have some of the savings in the earlier years, and they're worth more. It's the time value of money.
Kind of like what we're doing in Washington, where the grandchildren will pay for it, right?
No, I don't think, this is not deficit financing. We actually have a revenue stream, the airport, that will pay the bonds.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Mills.
Suzanne, could you just walk me through again the reasoning for this to do with the reserve fund? Well, not reserve fund, the fund that we're required to have.
The rate covenant?
Yeah, just real slow, and don't use CORs and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Thank you.
When
Mills is an architect.
When the 1992 bonds were issued, that was back when the passenger facility charge, or PFC program, was really in its infancy. And in order to get a bond rating and bond insurance on the 1992 bonds, which of course lowers your interest costs overall, the bond insurers would not allow you to use those passenger facility charge revenues in meeting your rate covenant. What the goal of a rate covenant is to provide bondholders with some sort of security that you're not living on the edge. You're not just generating enough to pay your debt service. They want a little bit of extra there, and you can use that extra for things like capital and other sorts of improvements at the airport. So that's how the rate covenant was established back in 1992. There was no history of PFCs, or there was very little history of PFC. Insurers, rating agencies were really uncomfortable with the program. As time went on, in 1998, when it was time to finance the expansion, actually, your airport was one of the very first airports that was able to get a commitment from the FAA to agree not to terminate your authority to collect PFCs and to pledge it to bonds. And actually, that saved you quite a bit of money on your 1998 expansion and the financing of the expansion of the facility. So I think you were probably the second airport in the country that was able to get that non-termination agreement from the FAA. And so you can see over time that the bond market has, gotten comfortable with passenger facility charges. And if you were to do a financing today, you probably would be allowed to include passenger facility charges in meeting that 125% rate covenant. Unfortunately, as long as the 1992 bonds are outstanding, that rate covenant will stay in place. And it's almost impossible to meet that after September 11th and the increase in your security costs and the decrease in revenues. And so the only alternative to meet that is to increase airline rates and charges. And I think we're all in agreement that that's probably not in your best interest. So refinancing this, restructuring it, trying to make that rate covenant a lot easier to meet, and moving, most of the debt away from under that umbrella of the 125 test and more into payable really strictly from PFCs. That'll be a big help to you.
But you will still be required to have a rate covenant. It is just substantially reduced.
Right. The rate covenant will still apply. You have some 1998 bonds that are under that rate covenant, so you'll still have that. But our goal is to lower the debt service on bonds that are under that rate covenant, so that maybe when we start out, we're at 150%. So if there's some event that causes rates or revenues to go down, you'll still be able to meet that. So we're trying to move as much out from under that umbrella as we can.
Okay, thank you. Very good job. For me.
Actually, I was always very interested. You were the second airport in the country, and the first was Little Rock. And it just so happens the president at that point in time was from Arkansas.
Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The second bond issue we'd like to talk about, and again, this is a copy if anybody doesn't have it, but I, excuse me, my memo of January 23rd about the refinancing of this 1994 Series A and B agency bonds. Does any council members need a copy of that one, or it was in your packet, I believe, last week?
Yeah, I'll have a copy.
Okay. This one we're going to need a little bit of direction on, and I think this is going to be an easier choice for you, though, because it's absolutely a no-brainer to refinance this one, because we're getting a really big decrease in the interest rates, no matter which structure we take. There's three basic kinds of choices that we have here. We can simply finance the issue over the existing term, and addresses Ms. Foat's concern earlier, pay a lower interest rate, the annual debt service goes down, much like refinancing your home mortgage. We can extend the term, taking a lower interest rate, and reduce the annual debt service payment even more. It would produce that one, scenario 2 as I described it here, would produce annual debt service savings of about $400,000 a year for the next 15 years for the redevelopment agency. Now again, you're extending the term, so you'll have debt service to pay further out. And the final component would be to extend the term and take the cash out up front. And that would produce, and I think I'd put it on the page, kind of a side-by-side comparison of all of those, upfront cash of about $5.4 million. After much discussion between myself and Mr. Raymond and Suzanne Harrell and some other folks, we came to the conclusion that the scenario that gives us the best set of options is scenario number 2. It extends the term, but we don't take any more new money out. It reduces the annual debt service payments. It matches that debt service maturity to the term on that maturity, 2033, to about where we are in terms of how long we can collect on redevelopment agency tax increment. And so it gives us the most flexibility for future bond issues. So we don't tie ourselves up and get a big slug of cash for a project which we really do not have right now. We don't simply take a smaller savings for the next 18 years, although that is an option. We think it gives us the best flexibility of any of the three options. But again, any one of those three, or even a variation on one of those three, would be a feasible alternative to what we have now. And Suzanne, any other additional comments on that?
I just have one or two things on redevelopment financing, particularly. When these bonds were issued in 1994, the redevelopment plans or project areas that you have now were not merged, and they had a much shorter life. In subsequent to this issue, the legislature changed the rules for redevelopment, the terms of project areas, how long they could, collect increment, how long they could have activities, and you were able to extend your plans to the full term allowable under the redevelopment law. So that's why you actually, in 1994, you really didn't have much authority to collect increment past 2022, the original maturity of the bonds. Now you've got this new 10-year window, which we really think you should take advantage of, structuring the bonds this way. So when you're ready to issue new money to fund a project, you've kind of, gotten a level base, and you'll be able to maximize your bonding capacity for a new project somewhere down the road.
Council questions? Mr. Mills.
Either Tom or Suzanne, could you explain to me why scenario 2 is better than scenario 1? Unless it just involves what you just talked about, the 10 years. Is that what it is?
It provides the better template for your future bonding. It does provide less present value savings up front, but by taking advantage of the remaining term of your ability to collect tax increment for each of the project areas, it provides a better template to overlay future debt on and gives you greater bonding capacity in the future.
Why is the size of issue greater for 1 than 2?
Under scenario 1, the debt service is higher each year for the first 20 years. And so the reserve requirement, which is, usually, an amount equal to debts, an annual debt service. So that amount is higher, so that actually bumps it up.
Thank you.
Council.
There's also Mr. Mayor, schedule on the last page of what I did pass out. And again, this would come back on April 21st for the authority to adopt the resolution approving the legal documents.
Mm-hmm.
And so if there's any concern about staff recommendation, we would like direction before we go down that road.
Yes, Ms. Phillips.
Just a quick question about the ratio. Does this affect the overall debt ratio by doing this refinancing?
The redevelopment financing is kind of done on a standalone basis. It has a specific source of revenue. It's different than your general fund. We are pledging one specific revenue source, tax increment. And so the fact that your redevelopment agency has bonded against its tax increment doesn't really affect your general fund debt ratios at all.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Oden. Along that same line, the airport refi, does that affect the general fund bonding ratios?
Same thing. That is a specific pledge of airport revenues and not payable from the general fund.
Thank you.
Mr. Ponier.
Just as for staff recommendation, scenario 2 is laid out, I think, presents itself with some opportunities for us. So I don't know how the rest of the council
Do we
feels.
need to be specific in which scenario, or just ask them to bring something back to us at this point?
I think staff would like some direction as to which way to go, but I mean, there doesn't. If we have a sense of that, there doesn't have to be a specific motion.
Council?
This is where your eyes glaze over at this point. But I would agree with Mr. Punier on scenario number 2, because I think it does give us it's a better option for us, and we don't have any project right now to to spend that additional money. And I always feel uncomfortable when we're just pulling cash out of a bond issue anyway.
Before Mr. Mills finds a project.
My house needs to be.
You want to give some direction, Mr. Mills?
I am in agreement on scenario 2.
Well, it appears that you have some direction, and we look forward to you bringing something back to us.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And one other bond issue that we're going to be talking about.
One more.
And this you have not seen yet, and so we're just kind of a first blush on this one. Although we have talked about the... Actually, this one is also fairly straightforward. I'll wait till you get the copies there.
Wondering where this one is.
Okay. We're ready?
Okay. What we're proposing here, Mr. Mayor and members of council, is a refinancing of the 1997 Convention Center bonds. Actually, what the effective way we're doing this would be to combine that with the financing for the new expansion. In this case, we would take the savings over the same maturity as the existing bonds. So again, we wouldn't be borrowing any new money. We would simply be taking those savings, though, and using them to help do the project. If you recall from Mr. Smoot's presentation to you a couple of weeks ago about the financing for the convention center, it had a shortfall. We did not have sufficient funds in there to do all of the things, and he was spending down the contingency amounts in there to make it balance. What this does is basically bring us back up to a fully funded contingency. So in that happy event that the project comes in under budget, you save the money on the contingency, and then it's savings to the general fund. But at least we have a little bit of extra breathing room in there to pay for the things that the council has included in the convention center expansion. Suzanne, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, one of the objectives for financing the convention center was to keep the debt service on an annual basis, the increase in debt service over what exists right now, at about $2.3 million, which is what we estimate is going to be generated from the rate increases in the TOT. And I think we've done a fairly good job of that when you look at the overall financing that's been done for the convention center as it exists now, plus the financing of the expansion. So you can see the numbers pretty much match up, and doesn't take into account any interest earnings and other things. So I think it's a pretty conservative estimate, and basically right on your estimates for the revenue that you anticipate paying the new debt service with.
Council, questions? Yes, Mr. Mills.
So what we're looking at here currently, I mean, this is, you can't go to print on this until the final numbers are in on the convention center. Is that correct?
That's right. We would anticipate waiting for the bids to be received and asking council for approval right around the time that you're awarding the bids. So once Mr. Smoot tells me that the bids that he's going to receive, represent the majority of all the construction costs, once we know what those are, then we can actually sell the bonds.
Okay. So these numbers might be changing a little bit.
Depending on what the bids come in
Correct.
at. It could be changing a lot, so hopefully the estimates are accurate. We would anticipate taking the bond issue actions back to council. I think it's on March 17th, and when the majority of the bids would be approved or not approved. And you can make the same decision on the bond issue at that night.
Okay.
One caveat that I do have is, we're all kind of holding our breath for March 2nd. If the deficit bonds don't pass and the state has to go to its Plan B or Plan C, that's going to make rating, Moody's came out with a report about if the bond, if the deficit bonds don't pass, it's really going to have a big impact on all of California financing in general. So I just want to have a caveat that, we may have to come and revisit this after March 2nd if something doesn't, if the deficit bonds don't pass, because I think the rating agencies and the bond insurers are going to be kind of in a little bit of a turmoil as to local government, because they're going to try to be assessing what impact it's going to have on you when we have no idea what that will be. So just a caveat.
And this bond, I'm sorry, this bond is secured by the general fund then. So this does affect our bonding capacity.
Yes. Okay. One other comment, too, that since Suzanne brought up the issue about the state of California's deficit bond, that bond issue is paying for prior years' deficits, operational deficits. And I just want to point out that all of the financings that we're talking about here today are financings of hard assets. The airport and the convention center, well, redevelopment agency, not specifically, but it has a separate revenue source. So it's not like we're saying, we had deficits in prior fiscal year and we're borrowing it, putting it on a credit card, as some people have characterized it. These are very conservative, financially sound borrowings.
But Tom, isn't the fourth proposal you're about ready to make take care of the $8 million the state's going to take from us?
No, I would not recommend that we borrow to cover a deficit, no matter how much it was, David.
Ms. Falk.
Yeah, I just have a question to make sure I'm reading this correct so I can, when I get to study it. This next to the last column is what our increase in debt service would be, and then the last column is what the income you expect from the increase in the TOT.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And you should, I also should point out there, you get into, let's see, it's 2026 when the old bonds get paid off, and then comparing the new debt service to, since they're paid off, the increase looks much larger. We would have all of the current TOT that's paying the existing debt service would now be freed up, and then, of course, that would be available to pay all of the debt service.
So the $2,300,000 is what we actually think we will be taking in increased debt service. I mean, an increased TOT, and the figure above that with the $5 million is what will have taken into date when that first payment is
Right. Another way of
due,
saying it is
basically.
existing TOT before the rate increases was producing $3.6 million, and it's actually more than that. But and the new TOT is another $2.3 million. So you add the two together. 2.3 and 2.3 is together. 3.3 and 2.3. First grade math here, and I'm getting it wrong. Is the $5.6 million, and you cover everything, right?
Okay, thank you.
And further answer your question, as you can see, we were very conservative, did not put a lot of rate increase into the transient occupancy tax collections in future years. We kept it at the $2.3 million so that anything that was generated over that from growth or whatever would be available for other purposes than just paying this debt service.
So then the total that we're doing will be a $40 million bond. $41 million bond, basically.
Actually, this one is going to be a lot more than 5% higher than the construction amount. You do have a construction amount of $40 million, and then we have costs on top of that. And a reserve fund, we have to fund a reserve fund, and in this case, that reserve fund is $2.3 million. And you can see you have no debt service payments in the first 2 years. That's because until that asset is actually constructed, until the expansion is complete, you're not allowed to make debt service payments for it. So we basically have to borrow money to set aside to make the payments for basically 2 years until the facility is complete. Of course, we're accumulating your TOT during the same period of time, and so we're, hopefully those two things wipe each other out. That's why the number in 2006 is so much higher than every other year, because we're going to use we're going to collect TOT, hold it on hand to pay off those extra bonds we had to issue in order to fund interest during that capital period. So The actual construction project itself is about $48 million between the
Bond issue.
Oh, sorry, bond issue between the $40 million of construction, the reserve, the capitalized interest, and the expenses. And then if you add in the 1997, the refinancing of the 1997, that on a standalone basis is about $11.5 million. So if you combine the two together, it's 60 million.
Mr. Mayor?
Now, you already have, of that 12.3 is already outstanding. That's the refinancing portion.
Yes, Mr. Mills, at 12.3.
Suzanne or Tom, when, again, I'm looking at the chart, and you get down and under the annual increase, say 2025, it jumps major, about a little more than double. But the increase is that's towards that's the last 8 years of the payment of the bond, and that is that pretty normal?
Well, what happens is the old bonds were paid off, and you're looking at the annual debt service, which is staying pretty much the same. And so the difference between the two, if you look at it this way, it's the old bond issues are paid by the old TOT, and the new bond issues are paid by the new TOT.
And all you're showing on the far right column is the new TOT, not anything to do with the old TOT.
Right, exactly. So if we wanted to, we could have said available TOT maybe, and it would have matched that debt service.
Right, okay. So I'm not quite as scared. Okay.
Well, you're going to be out of office by then anyway.
And also too, you are looking at this from a very conservative standpoint, in that you're assuming that rates will be the same. I mean, if you're counting on the 2.3 generation, or the 2.3 coming from the new TOT, you're holding that same number all the way through,
right?
Which would mean rates would be the same, hotel rates would be the same.
Yeah, and it's likely that rates, hotel rates, along with everything else, is going to increase in prices. Hopefully we'll have new hotels built, the total TOT collections. And certainly the expansion of the convention center ought to increase that's why we're doing it. To bring more business into town, which would increase the TOT. But we didn't include any of those things in the projection. So I think it's fairly conservative and fairly as safe as you can be for something that you're taking out 40 or 30 years.
Thank you.
Any additional comments? Thank you. And we'll take a brief recess and we will return. call this meeting back to order. And we will move to item number 3, Assessment District Formation Policy. Mr. Alshire, I understand.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, after consultations with Mr. Alshire, I'll be needing to recuse myself from this discussion.
Well, I guess if we have to let you go, Mr. Fournier.
We'll see you next week.
All right. Mr. Eddy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. The question this evening about the special assessment districts is really a very pointed and narrow question that I would like to pose to council. In April of 2002, City Council updated the assessment district policy to reflect the changes in state laws, and it allowed us to do the Mountain Gate project, which is well underway. We have a assessment district policy that is a fine policy. It's 14 pages long, and as you can imagine, it has all the proper formalities that an assessment district policy should have. However, there's a couple things in here that I just want to bring to your attention, because the one question council is going to have to answer is, and we would like some direction, is do you want to add some policy reasons for doing assessment districts? And it'll be clear when I just read a couple sentences from our policy. Currently, the City Council has all the discretion in the world in granting an assessment district. And just let me read a sentence. The determination of benefit will be at the sole discretion of the City of Palm Springs, but it doesn't define what the benefit is. For example, you may want to say the benefit is for a development that could happen on land that's currently developable for any number of reasons. There may be barriers such as flood control issues, infrastructure problems that don't make the numbers pencil out, and it may warrant assistance. Or it could be council has a public policy reason in creating an area of housing that is at a certain price level, and maybe that's the public policy reason. But currently, those things are not in this policy. So you have discretion, but it doesn't say what the benefits are in terms of a definition. Second of all, and this is a little more, makes it a little more gray area, because as a general policy statement in your plan, one more sentence I will read. The city does not wish to encourage assessment district or community facilities districts financing, but will consider its implementation in certain circumstances which are clearly beneficial to the city. So again, you have the discretion if it's beneficial, but it does not define what beneficial is. It does define, however, the other criteria, for example, the loan to lean to loan ratio and things of that nature. But it doesn't address the discretionary. Now, the question is important because in the past we've not had many of these requests. In the last year we've had one Mountain Gate, but we know that there are at least 3 or 4 coming towards council probably in the next 2 to 3 to 4 months. For example, Mountain Gate 2, the Classic, and the Villas and 48 at Baristo. So the question tonight, council, is if you want to consider philosophically what that discretionary or policy reasons are, because you're going to have 3 or 4 coming before you, and they will matriculate to council through this policy in a timely fashion, but we'll have to ask you the question if you like the developer's project, and then if it meets these criteria that are set forth, you would allow that assessment district to take place. The one problem for the developer is to get to the answers outlined in the criteria here, the developer has to spend a significant amount of money to do their due diligence on the reporting, on the demographics, on the dollars, and the fiscal analysis. So it would be important to them to know if council likes the project on the discretionary side before they go ahead with the expenditures to come up with the other side of the equation. So that is the central question this evening. If, in fact, council just wants to leave the policy as it is, and that's perfectly fine, or if you want to address the issue of council's discretion in what those benefits are to the city.
Mr. Mayor, if I could add a couple points, because I think you could go several ways in terms of the information presented tonight.
Okay.
We actually, Suzanne Harrell, who was here earlier, Suzanne and Tom
And
Knar.
she's still here.
She's still here, hasn't left yet. But Suzanne, Tom, and myself worked on the current policy. So if you want some historical overview, we could speak to that. There actually, I believe, are some of the development communities here who could also speak to kind of what their current issues are. And I think David indicated very well that the most critical issue is that if there was some reason why the council was intending to change the current policy, there are people out there who have been assuming that this policy was going to remain in place, and they'd like to know earlier rather than later if there was going to be any kind of fundamental change in the policy. And the city, when I started here in 1990, because of the bad experiences that had occurred with Melrose financing and so forth, the city decided to adopt a very restrictive policy of not even giving itself the discretion of providing this type of financing. As we rolled into the doldrums of the 90s, eventually the concern was that we didn't have a financial mechanism available that other communities did have available, and that we need to do everything to try and encourage development in the community. So it was decided to develop a policy, but again, working with Tom and Suzanne, we tried to develop a very restrictive policy to make sure that the kinds of financial problems that people had with assessment districts would not be permitted to occur under this policy. So the policy was established to allow it to go forward, but again, as David read that critical sentence, the city does not wish to encourage it, but will consider it in circumstances where there's clearly a benefit. Now, and then David's also right, we didn't go on to have well, here's the list of the 3 things where we consider it to be beneficial. It was to set up a process so the council could become familiar with the project and then decide whether or not to go forward. And there is a lot of latitude, although in terms of the financial protections and the assessed value that has to be in the land to support the financing, you have very strict criteria in your policy on that. So that's a very brief overview. Again, I think you could we could outline what's in the policy. We could give you more history as to why it got adopted the way it did. And you have some of the development community here who could also speak to what kinds of current needs they see coming forward with. And it's kind of up to you how far you want to go with this tonight.
Council? That far?
I have a question about are assessment districts treated equally on fee and as they are, on lease land as they are on fee land?
Well, are you talking about with respect to Indian lease land? We had a rather unfortunate experience with an assessment district on Indian lease land because the security for a land-based financing, the security is the land, and with a lease financing, the security is the lease, and that assessment district, there was the underlying fee land of the Indians was not pledged to this. So what happened was in this assessment district, the particular assessment district, which was a $4 million assessment district, the leases were pledged, and so when the particular developers had economic issues and were not able to proceed with developing that property, the lessors terminated the leases, and there suddenly was no security left for the financing. So since that point in time, the city's position has really been it would take some very special circumstances before we would consider an assessment district in that situation. We've occasionally had a discussion with the tribe. They understand the situation. The city got stuck for $1 million to take care of that failed assessment district. so I think the Indians appreciate that because of that experience. It would take some very special circumstances before we would try and deal with an assessment district looking at leased land.
Okay. Council, any questions? Yes, Ms. Fultz.
Just one other question. In looking at this, in putting a list of criteria becomes a lot more restrictive in having to somehow meet that criteria, or if there was something else that you were meeting that we hadn't thought about to put in that criteria. So what is the advantage to us of actually putting in a criteria? I didn't understand that from your presentation.
Yes, the advantage would be, right now, the criteria is on the financial side, to protect the city from the financial side. But the advantage on the policy side is there may be some thought in the community, from the realtor community and some others, that if you have a lot of Mello-Roos and a lot of assessment districts, it's unattractive to the homeowner, it's unattractive to that whole segment of the universe out there. So as we start to get to see more and more of these things coming to council for approval, the question is, does council maybe just want to use those for special circumstances for public policy purpose? For example, the city feels that they need a certain level of housing price within a certain price range. So you could say, well, we will do an assessment district for a developer if they comply with this rule. Or, for example, in the South Palm Canyon area, there is a developer there that has a project, but because of the flood control requirements, it's so enormous, probably not going to pencil out. However, that could be a public policy reason that it's important to develop there, so you may want to do an assessment district to make the numbers pencil out. So that's the advantage to the city, to achieve some city interest, such as those examples. On the other hand, you could be completely, and this is an important point too, it's fine as a policy issue if council wants, on the other hand, just to say, we'll take all assessment districts as they come and have no regulation at all. I mean, that would be a legitimate policy as well. So the question is just which way do you think you may want to be?
And I think that
if you leave it at that, then don't we run into kind of discriminatory things where you have one assessment district which you denied for that, but you okayed it over here? Doesn't it create a discriminatory kind of thing or a precedent-setting kind of thing?
Clearly, there is a legal question there, but your policy right now is set up for that. You have sole discretion.
Uh-huh.
And you could be in a situation where you would have two districts in a similar circumstance and make different decisions. And if you did that, I don't think it's a particular legal issue because nobody has a legal entitlement to an assessment district. But in the political world, in terms of equity, there would certainly be a concern. The problem with the other way, which I think your question went to, is if you were to try and define criteria, there's the potential that, once you put the bar here, there's something slightly below that bar that it turns out once you know about the project, you think, well, that's really a great thing. And now you've created a policy. So the question is whether we really have the wisdom to define all of those criteria. Now, again, Suzanne, who does a lot more of this than I do, could speak to you as to whether she's familiar with policies that try and set that type of criteria. But as we sit here today, not only was this utilized in Mountain Gate, which obviously has brought some very important development to an area of our community that really is benefiting from seeing that growth. So again, it's actually in that instance, it isn't the particular project, but the area benefits to a great degree from that project. David mentioned one in the Palm Canyon area where the flood control cost of trying to put in the infrastructure is enormous. And so there's a justification there. But now the classic people are going to be looking at doing something out in that area. So when we went through this the last time and we had this discussion, at least the staff level, I mean, we didn't really have the discussion at the council level. There didn't seem to be that particular concern. But at the staff level, when we kind of talked about it, there was we just weren't sure if we tried to put criteria in that we really knew what they would be, so that we wouldn't end up drawing the line at a place where it turns out, as soon as we draw it, a project comes through and everybody says, well, wait, we think this is a good one. So that's the problem with drawing the line.
Mr. Mayor,
McCullough?
is there anyone here, I see that some people came down tonight, who wants to speak in favor of us changing the policy and putting these restrictions in?
Or against.
Or against? Well, I haven't really heard a really good argument for us trying to have a crystal ball and figure out what kind of restrictions we want to place on these things, and then tying our hands later. I was wondering if there's someone who wants to try to sell the other side there.
Well, that.
Can I give you
Yes, come on.
Thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. My name is Ernie Benson. I'm with Palm Springs Modern. Our offices here are at. Am I on?
Yeah, there you go.
Can you hear now? Oh, yeah, okay. My name is Ernie Vincent. I'm with Palm Springs Modern Homes. We're a home builder here in Palm Springs. We build condominiums and single-family residences. And we have currently in process an application for an assessment district on 2 projects that we have under development right now. It's been my experience, having done a few of these in the past, that when city councils who are unfamiliar with assessment districts are presented with a request, they have a number of questions. And so I had an interest in finding out if there were any concerns about assessment districts generally, since we do have one in process. And we are at a point where we need to get moving on it fairly quickly, because we will have escrows closing towards the middle and the late part of the year. And it's generally advisable to get all that taken care of before that happens. It's fully disclosed to all our home buyers that the assessment district is in process. They know about it. They're aware of it. And so, you don't have a problem there. But it has been my experience that sometimes city councils do have concerns, and they do think about changing their policy. Personally, I would think that it's to your benefit to leave your policy as is, because it does give you maximum discretion. As Mr. Alishar pointed out, there's really no legal requirement if you approve an assessment district for one developer that you have to approve one for all developers. It's entirely within the discretion of the city. And I think the city's council and staff are perfectly well qualified to exercise that discretion on a case-by-case basis. But I'm available to answer any questions. I know there's some other representatives from some of the other developers here too as well. So thank you.
Okay, if there's anyone else who would like to say something for or against. Please give your name for the record.
My name is Carlos Cueva. I'm with Century Kroll Communities. And I wanted to thank both the council and the staff. We are the Mountain Gate subdivision. We are working on that. It's 308 homes that we have under construction at the north end of town. And the assessment district has allowed us the opportunity to come into a new community, a new area, part of town that has allowed us to revitalize that area. And I know from some of the articles in the newspaper, it has brought in a resurgence of activity within that existing community, which I think is beneficial to both the city and ourselves as constructors of those homes in that area. So we would like to see the guidelines remain the same and work with staff on a case-by-case basis. And I can answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, Mayor and Council. Mayor and Council members. My name is Kevin Lynch with Lennar Communities. We are, as you may or may not know, we are the developers, the lead developer on the Palm Green Classic project. It's critical to us to have an assessment district on that. It was performant that way, and it's we were abiding by the when we first were going through the due diligence. We did checked out the current assessment district policy, and as you know, we have much infrastructure on that project, and that was one of the critical items to us. And we would be very much in support of leaving that policy the same. So, thank you, and we're available for any questions also.
Is there anyone else? Okay, then.
Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Mills.
I'm a very big fan of flexibility for the council. I think the policy we have now was put in for a reason to give us that flexibility. The concern that I do have is, flexibility is great. Consistency is also important, and the two don't necessarily go together when you're dealing with potentially 5 different people sitting here from one year to the next to the next. And what I wouldn't want us to do would be to handcuff not only ourselves but future councils as the needs of the city change. And I think the needs of the cities currently are not what the needs of the city were 5 years ago. And if we did have specific things, well, we may not be able to deal with those needs, current needs, without having to go back and change it. So I think to allow the flexibility that we currently have is important. But I don't want it to be expected. I don't want it to be to become a crutch to a developer to come in and just naturally think he's going to get this. And we are dealing with some projects here that are upper end projects, high dollar projects, and what the assessment district was going to do is allow the sales price to stay lower, somewhat lower, and the individual buyer would be paying for it over time on his taxes. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, and I'm not implying that there is anything wrong, but it's essentially it's essentially a method to help marketing, and I think that's important. But I just don't want it to become something expected and something that we end up doing every time someone asks for it. And we're talking about new construction here, but also we're talking about we should be talking about existing areas if we're looking at improvements, or if we're talking about median island maintenance, we're talking about lighting districts, we're talking about all of that. And I think the council needs to to maintain the flexibility, again, as I mentioned, but we also need to be responsible in how we use that authority, and we allow that to happen. And just simply asking for it should not be automatic. And I think staff needs to let people know that that is what our policy is, and that I also think we should encourage our neighborhoods, when they see improvements, to look at the vehicle also, because I think most people probably don't know what's available. And as our neighborhoods develop as they seem to be, then there are means to upgrade the neighborhoods that can be done through these districts. So I think, along with what we're talking about here, educationally, I think there's an opportunity to let other people know in existing neighborhoods that there are things they can do if they're looking in terms of upgrading. But flexibility, I think, is important.
Mr. Alshire, I just have a question. Could we establish a criteria that wouldn't necessarily affect the resolution? So it just becomes kind of a policy direction for us.
Well, this is a policy direction. I mean, I don't. You can put your policy into different things. You've got this policy here. You could have a separate resolution dealing with it, but it would really be clearer if you're going to have a policy to have it all in one place, so it won't get lost. So I don't know exactly what policy you have in mind.
I guess I would not want it to be restrictive, but kind of some guidelines or parameters that we could reference, that could be reviewed periodically as council members change, to see if the needs in the community are the same and the goals are the same, because it could change, but just some criteria. The reason I say that is because years ago, when council was unwilling to even entertain the discussion of any sort of assessment district, and when Mountain Gate came, that was not an easy situation for us, but we looked at a lot of things, and there are reasons, specifically, whether we have them on paper or not, that we made those specific adjustments. Now, while I would not want to tie our hands for the future, they met a certain criteria that we were looking for. And of course, we weren't thinking about, projects lining up at that particular time, but now they are. And I certainly would not, so I really appreciate you giving it a broader perspective, Chris, and also bringing in the issues of the median islands, et cetera. But also, I wouldn't want them to come with the expectation that because one received it, that we're going to do this for every project that comes here, because that may not be, I don't think it's appropriate. Even before I don't think it's going to be appropriate for all of them. But if we have some specific goals in mind, and of course that means if we don't, then every project that comes to the city, we're going to have to go through this, and there could be a lot of those, which could eliminate some if we had something in writing that says, okay, well, here's some of the things that we'll look at. So I'm sort of torn at this point on which way to go, and I'll probably need a little more information.
Well, if you do want to add some criteria, the place to add it is to this policy. And just because it's in here doesn't mean you can't change it in the future. So I think your idea of having something in writing, I mean, this is the place to put it. Now, but the next question will become, what are those criteria? It clearly...
It would depend on the area
and
the project.
The reason that we're bringing this forward is that if you actually knew of some situations, again, the policy basically says what Chris said. We're not encouraging it. It says that, but we will consider it in specific circumstances. You don't go on to define those circumstances. Now, if you knew as you sat here, we would never do one of these in ABC. Sure. Well, yeah, it would help to put it there, because otherwise we have developers who are checking out the policy and they think that it's potentially available. And if you knew that you wouldn't consider it in certain circumstances, you could put it in there. You could always change your mind. But we as staff are not we don't know of what those circumstances would be that you absolutely preordained you're not going to consider it. But if you can think of them, that's why we're here.
I guess I'm leaning more toward not addressing it, only because it's so varied, and I guess as long as we're willing to look at each one, then we can make those individual determinations, but it means that we'll have to look at each one.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr. McCullough.
Mr. Elshire started a sentence that really caught my attention, and he stopped midway. He said, the reason we're bringing this before you tonight is, and then you went off on another tangent.
Well, if in fact we have new council members who, and this is the first time to look at this policy, and you now have some projects that will be coming forward that you know something about. If, as we sat here tonight, or a week from now, or in the fairly near term, if you basically said, I just don't think we would want to use it in the following circumstances, it would be good to put it out there because, again, part of the business-friendly thing is not surprising people at the end of the process. I think each of these developers could probably come in here and they made a general statement of why they needed it, but they could probably give you chapter and verse in the economics of their project why it's critical to them. I do think there's a transactional cost of doing an assessment district. You have consultants that have to be hired, you've got additional engineering, you've got to do a whole fee formula to figure out exactly what that assessment's going to be. So somebody that's doing a pretty small project, it's not going to be worth it to do the assessment district. So I don't think that this means for every single residential project you're going to see this. But for your larger scale projects, you will see it. And that's what you're hearing tonight. So where I was going with that was that if the council did know up front that you were not going to consider it in certain circumstances, then I think everybody would benefit to put it down in writing so we knew that. But if you're not sure, then it's not every project, but your larger scale projects will probably be in front of you bringing this forward. And you will have the discretion to do what you feel like and listen to their case and decide on an ad hoc basis whether you want to go forward.
Mr. Mills.
I would think, and I don't know if we put it in the policy or not, I think one of the important things to know when these projects come in is up front. Are you looking at this or are you not looking at this? A little box on the application that you check. Or however you handle it, but because if I'm looking at a project and they're looking for an assessment district, and there are certain, which is aid in a sense, I may look at it differently, and what I wouldn't like to have happen is the project come through, get its approval, and oh by the way, we want to do an assessment district, and perhaps our opportunity to get different things happening within that project are gone by the wayside because the project's too far along to deal with it. So I would say that if I was looking for a policy for, and again, you're talking about larger projects, that would be something that I would certainly want to see happen or encourage. Not that that necessarily needs to be the case, but that makes me look at something differently and perhaps gain some opportunity for the city or the look of the project, the layout of the project, or something that might be more flexible if we knew. I mean, if we knew and or that the developer was looking for this. I mean, it's part of a negotiating tool, and the way I'm looking at it, and I would hope that we would encourage that to happen up front, so we're not approving projects and then coming back and getting involved in doing this, because part of the reason to allow it would be because you want to encourage a specific project, and if you need some adjustment to that project to make it to what the city council thinks is a better project. And I think we should be able to use it as a tool just as well as a developer. So, assuming that's legal.
Yeah, well, no, I think you could definitely, you've got a really good point there, and I think you could definitely, in your application, I assume you're saying like at the beginning when they submit their planning application, if they were interested in that, they check a box. The only negative is, if in the application you put that box, there are people who would never think about it, that they see a box, are you interested in assessment financing? And they say, that sounds interesting. They might be
Well,
sent.
you know, David, I would agree with you maybe 5 years ago, but not anybody that's looking at spending the kind of money that's going to generate $1 million project. I think all of them are thinking about it. And
I think if the council would like us to put something in the application process along that line, I think that certainly
well, I don't know if you
done.
need to check the box, but you may need to just ask the question. But I think, I mean, if I was to think of any one thing that I would want to know about a project, it would be that. Whether, you know, even if it's in, you know, I think we asked that right now essentially for a DDA. Are you looking at a DDA with this application? And we could be thinking the same terms if you're looking for an assessment district.
Well, I think the point, a good point that Chris makes is the fact that we simply don't want to find this information out at the end of the process. The earlier in the process, the better, whether it's on the box or not, on the application, but not too far into the process.
You know, we don't advise you to check this box, but
But you know, I would also like some additional information from staff on advantages and disadvantages and perhaps some areas of concern that will give us a little more information to make a better informed decision for the future.
You know, I think the biggest policy dilemma about this whole subject matter is that you're potentially creating two classes of citizens. For newer developing communities where the whole community is being built out and everybody, it's one assessment district after the next, when you're all done, everybody's in the same boat because everybody's got an assessment district. The way things are trying to finance municipalities today, the assessment district offers the opportunity of raising money to pay for things that otherwise are pretty difficult to pay for. And so it's a real challenge not to grab the opportunity because your opportunity to finance things in so many other ways is so restricted. So it's really a challenge. I mean, it's very difficult not to take advantage of that opportunity. The problem in a community such as ours, where much of it is developed, is that in these new areas, there will these residents will be paying at a different level than the existing residents. Now, in my experience, the way politically you can make that work without it becoming a big problem down the road is to make sure that in these areas that are developed, the residents have some special things that they can distinguish their neighborhood from other neighborhoods and feel like, you know, I'm paying a little more, but I'm paying an assessment district. Those people, you know, a half mile away are not paying. But on the other hand, we have something special. For example, you know, Mountain Gate, a gated community. So I think basically I'm agreeing with your point that when you're from planning process processing the project, it is important to understand how this is all going to come together because you need to be looking at doing some things with respect to that project so that those residents will, at the end of the day, if they have to pay that extra fee, they will feel they got something for it.
Mr. Mayor, what they're getting for it is, at least initially, they're getting lower cost housing. It's really a financing mechanism.
That's true. The issue is 5 years later down the road when they're going to be comparing themselves to others, and that original cost issue will leave their consciousness.
Well, yeah, because there's going to we've seen this before in other issues. There's not very good communication. But
Right.
when you're looking at a $2,500 tax bill versus a $4,000 tax bill across the street, you're going to pay. You're not going to pay. You're going to be willing to pay a premium for the one with the lower tax bill. Doesn't have the assessment on it. So.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mills.
I think, you know, I've seen some of the assessment districts that have been have come back to haunt the council, and Mesquite Country Club being one in a sewer assessment. David, you were probably around when that came back, and but these districts we're talking about, they go on the tax rolls from day one, and it's assessed to everybody from day one. Mesquite wasn't quite that way, and it was in the escrow instructions, not on the tax roll. So that kind of problem we wouldn't have here. Is that pretty much correct?
Right, and one of the things in the policy is dealing with the CC&Rs and making sure that everybody has a notice and that it's simple and it's not buried in a bunch of other documents, and so that is a part of your policy, and it comes out of that concern.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Reddy.
I believe the first application will probably be before you in the next 30 days, and we can continue the discussion then.
Then there are no other items on the agenda. We will call this meeting adjourned.